Hi, we're going to read chapter 35 from the book Holes. And for chapter 35, I would like you to do a Fab 4 on your piece of paper. So you're going to take your paper and divide it into 4 squares. You're going to write clarification, prediction, question, and summary. You're going to write them on your paper like that. And then we're going to make a prediction to start off for chapter 35. I'm going to read the last sentence of chapter 34, and then I will make our prediction. Then a dark hand and an orange sleeve reached out from under the tunnel. So I'm going to write, I predict chapter 35 will tell us who came out of the tunnel because chapter 34 ended with someone coming out of the tunnel under the boat. All right, let's find out who it was. Zero's face looked like a jack-o'-lantern that had been left out too many days past Halloween, half rotten and with sunken eyes and drooping smile. I'm so happy Zero's okay. Is that water? He asked. His voice was weak and raspy. His lips were so pale that they were almost white, and his tongue seemed to flop around uselessly in his mouth as he spoke, as if it kept getting in the way. It's empty, said Stanley. He stared at Zero, not quite believing he was real. I tried to bring you the whole water truck, but I drove into a hole. I can't believe you're... Me either. Come on, we gotta get back to camp. Zero shook his head. I'm not going back. You have to. What? We both have to. You want some sploosh? Zero asked. So before we keep going, why does Stanley want to take Zero back to camp? That's a great question. And I'm going to start my answer. I think Stanley wants to take Zero back because Zero is sick and needs water. All right, let's keep going. Zero shaded his eyes with his forearm. It's cooler under the boat, he said. Stanley watched Zero crawl back through his hole. It was a miracle he was still alive, but Stanley knew he would have to get him back to camp soon, even if he had to carry him. He crawled after him and was just able to squeeze his body through the hole. He never would have fit when he was first had come to Green Lake. He lost a lot of weight. As he pulled himself through, his legs struck something sharp and hard. It was a shovel, and for a second Stanley wondered how it got there, but then remembered that Zero had taken it with him after striking Mr. Podansky. It was cooler under the boat, which was half buried in the dirt. There was enough cracks and holes in the bottom of the boat, and now the roof, to provide light and ventilation. Let's clarify the word ventilation. ventilation. Ventilation means holes or spaces where air can get through. So holes or spaces where air can get through. All right, let's keep going. He could see empty jars scattered about. Zero held a jar in his hand and grunted as he tried to unscrew the lid. What is it? Sploosh. We better clarify sploosh. I don't know what that is right now, but I'm going to put it in my clarify. Sploosh. There it is in my clarification. And I will figure out what it means by reading on. Sploosh's voice was strained as he worked on the jar. That's what I call it. They were buried under the boat. He still couldn't get the lid off. I found 16 jars. Here, hand me the shovel. Stanley hadn't had a lot of room to move. He reached behind him, grabbed the wooden end of the shovel, and held it out to Zero, blade first. Sometimes you just have to, and Zero said as he hit the jar against the blade of the shovel, breaking the top of the jar clean off. He quickly brought the jar to his mouth and licked the sploosh off the jagged edges before it spilled. Careful, Stanley warned. Zero picked up the cracked lid and licked the sploosh off that as well. Then he handed the broken jar to Stanley. Drink some. Stanley held it in his hand and stared at it for a moment. He was afraid of the broken glass. He was also afraid of the sploosh. It looked like mud. Whatever it was, he realized, it must have been in the boat when the boat sank. That meant it was probably over 100 years old. Who knew what kind of bacteria might be living in it? It's good, said Zero, encouraging him. He wondered if Zero had ever heard of bacteria. He raised the jar to his mouth and carefully took a sip. It was a warm, bubbly, mushy nectar, sweet and tangy. So what is sploosh? It's a warm, sweet drink. About 100 years old. All right, let's keep reading. He thought it might have been some kind of fruit, perhaps from peaches. So it's a warm, sweet drink made of peaches. And both this definition comes from the book, page 157. Ventilation, that definition came from Miss Rachel. We forgot to say that. Remember, you got to always tell me where you got your clarification from. All right, and I'm guessing that because the sploosh is so old, it's kind of fermented. And fermented means when you take a liquid and you add some different bacteria to it, it can become almost like alcohol. Zero smiled at him. I told you it was good. Stanley didn't want to drink too much, but it was too good to resist. They passed the jar back and forth until it was empty. How many are left, he asked. None, said Zero. I'm not digging any more holes, said Zero. They won't make you dig, Stanley promised. They'll probably send you to a hospital, like Barf Bag. Barf Bag stepped in a rattlesnake, said Zero. Stanley remembered how he'd almost done the same. I guess he didn't hear the rattle. He did it on purpose, said Zero. You think? He took off his shoe and sock first. Stanley shivered as he tried to imagine it. What's Mare-Lu? Asked Zero. What? Zero concentrated hard. Mare-Lu. I have no idea. I'll show you, said Zero, and he crawled out from under the boat. Stanley followed. Back outside, he had to shield his eyes from the brightness. Zero walked around to the back of the boat and pointed to the upside-down letters. Mare-Lu. Stanley smiled. Mary Lou, it's the name of the boat. Mary Lou, Zero repeated, studying the letters. I thought wide made a y sound. It does, but not when it's at the end of a word. Sometimes Y is a vowel. Zero suddenly groaned. He grabbed his stomach and bent over. Are you all right? So why did Zero, put that by your question, why did Zero bend over in pain? Question mark. And then I think Zero bent over in pain because he drank too much sploosh. And now he's sick. All right. Zero dropped to the ground. He lay on his side with his knees pulled to his chest, and he continued to groan. Stanley watched helplessly. He wondered if it was the sploosh. He looked back towards Camp Green Lake. At least he thought it was the direction. He wasn't entirely sure. Zero stopped moaning, and his body slowly unbent. I'm taking you back, said Stanley. Zero managed to sit up. He took several deep breaths. Look, I got a plan. You won't get in trouble. Remember when I found that gold tube? Remember I gave it to X-Ray? And Warden went crazy making us dig where she thought X-Ray found it. I think I tell the Warden where I really find it. And I think found it. And I think she'll let us off. I'm not going back, said Zero. You're not nowhere else. You've got nowhere else to go, said Stanley. Zero said nothing. I'll die out here. Stanley didn't know what to do. He had come to rescue Zero and instead drank the last of his sploosh. He looked off in the distance. I want you to look at something. I'm not. I just want you to look at the mountains up here. See the one that has something sticking out of it? Yeah. What does it look like to you? Does it look like anything? Zero said nothing. But as he studied the mountain, his right hand slowly formed a fist, and he raised up a thumb. And his eyes went from the mountain to his hand, then back up to the mountain. All right, let's write our summary. And today in chapter 35, Stanley found Zero. They both drank sploosh. Zero is sick from too much sploosh and no water or food. Stanley wants to take him back. To take Zero back. Zero refuses to go back. They see big thumb. All right. And that's the end of chapter 35.